A historic agreement to address a critical shortage of water in the Middle East. It's being sold as a benefit to all, but it's opened the floodgates to a wave of accusations and recriminations. We dip below the surface and ask what's at stake and who stands to gain. This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Shiulie Ghosh. Now, it's being sold as a rare example of regional cooperation, a deal between Israeli, Palestinian and Jordanian ministers to provide new sources of water for the three neighbours and maybe save the Dead Sea along the way. But it's a deal swirling with political, environmental and moral undercurrents. Let's take a look at it. The new project would provide a desalination plant on the northern tip of the Red Sea in Aqaba. That will provide Jordan and Israel with a new source of drinking water and allow Israel to sell desalinated water for use in the occupied West Bank. A later phase could see a 180-kilometre pipeline to carry brine from the desalination plant on the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. The idea is to replenish the Dead Sea, which is declining at a metre a year. Well, ministers signing the agreement at the World Bank in Washington were unanimous in their praise for the project.
We are joining hands with our regional partners to develop such an important project, which I think will be a model, not only for our region, but to the whole world where we have conflict and hostilities.
We're living and we're sharing, despite the problem that we do have, but also we're sharing also the problem that comes from the scarcity of water. Today we showed that we can work together in terms of making more water available.
Let's hope that that agreement will be a glimmer of hope for, let's say, future agreements for comprehensive peace in the region.
Well, we'll introduce our guests in just a moment. But first, Simon McGregor-Wood has more on this for Inside Story from the Dead Sea in Jordan.
The politicians on all sides of this deal are making some pretty bold claims about the benefits, and clearly there is a strategic breakthrough, if you like, but principally I think at the level of the politics of water. People in Jordan, people in southern Israel and of course people in the occupied West Bank are desperately short of water. They need more both for drinking and for farming, and this deal will deliver significant increases in supplies. But I think the problem from the environmental point of view and from the sceptical point of view is that the politicians are also making some pretty grand claims that the deal will also address frankly, the disaster that is the Dead Sea today. And the skeptics are saying, well, the numbers simply don't back up those claims. This Dead Sea problem translates into a metre lost in level every year. According to environmentalists, that's 800 million cubic metres lost every year. Now, the best case scenario under this deal is that the Dead Sea would receive only 100 million cubic metres from the Red Sea and the desalination works every year. And that, well, it's simply not enough to even address the falling levels. The environmentalists say the only way to get to grips with this problem is to stop people taking water out of the Jordan River, which is the Dead Sea's natural supply. And for years, the Jordan has been over-extracted by Israel, Jordan and Syria. And until that problem is addressed, the Dead Sea is in real trouble and for a long time to come. And the deal signed yesterday in Washington makes for some nice headlines, some good PR for sure, but it's about the politics of water, it's about human consumption, it's not about saving the Dead Sea. I'm Simon McGregor-Wood for Inside Story by the shores of the Dead Sea.
Well, let's introduce today's guests. In Amman in Jordan, Munqeth Mehyar, Chairman of Friends of the Earth Middle East and Director of its Amman office. Joining us from Rehovot, south of Tel Aviv, is Jerusalem Post journalist Sharon Udassin, who specialises in the environment, energy and water. And in Norwich in the UK is Mark Zaytoun, a reader at the School of International Development at the University of East Anglia and director of the university's Water Security Research Centre. Good to have all of you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sharon, let me start with you. As simply as an agreement to get more water to consumers, this is being heralded as a great agreement. It demonstrates how all sides can cooperate with each other. Is that how it's being seen in Israel?
Yes, in general, it is being viewed exactly that way in Israel, especially by Energy and Water Minister Silvan Shalom, who yesterday exactly called it a historic agreement. While there definitely are critics on certain levels, from just a geopolitical perspective, this is perceived as a positive agreement, one that will bring about water sharing and swaps in a region that is really starved for water.
And Munqeth, it is a fact that these countries do need water. How badly is the water shortage situation in this region?
Well, it's a well-known fact that the whole region is suffering, but if we look at each country by itself, we find that Israel living a very relaxed timing, because with the desalination plants that they did on the Mediterranean, they have an abundant extra water in their water economy. In Jordan, we have shortage of 450 million cubic meters. Also, the DC project made it a bit bearable this summer. But we all know that the Palestine, who is suffering the most, not being able to control any kind of resources, not even the aquifers in the mountain aquifer under their feet. So the region, it's not all the same. Israel is relaxed in the water economy, and the two other countries are in trouble, in my opinion.
Mark, do you agree with that? Israel is very, very worried about, well, it's doing more about water security than other countries are doing. It's invested millions in desalination projects.
Yeah, certainly the disparity that Munqeth mentioned is there. But the Israeli desalination production, which is 5 or 6 times more than this project is going to build, should be understood in the light of why the Dead Sea is dying in the first place and whether the benefits of this new project will be distributed equitably. Because essentially there's no water security without equitable sharing or water security for all, in fact. So it's the big question is, how will this new water that's produced be distributed? And if we look back at the process that brought us to this point, we have some indications that it won't be distributed equitably.
Well,
so
let's look at the agreement in more detail, because as I understand it, this agreement will allow Israel to sell more desalinated water to the Palestinians. But the key word is sell. And actually, the Palestinians presumably would prefer to have access to fresh river water. So why would they enter into this agreement?
Good question. I think if you look at the reaction, there are people in all of the countries actually are opposing it. In Jordan, as Munqeth can explain, and in Israel, environmentalists. And in the West Bank, Palestinian NGOs just last month released a statement against this project, precisely because it undermines Palestinian water rights. So they're advocating for their rights, not to purchase water as a consumer.
Yeah, well, let's look back at that statement made by NGOs. As Mark says, in October, more than 20 non-governmental organisations called on the Palestinian Authority to reject this deal. They say the project undermines Palestinian water rights and legitimises Palestinian dispossession from the Jordan River. Instead of being able to access the fresh river water, Palestinians will be sold desalinated water at a high cost. The group say the plan doesn't address damage to the West Bank Eastern Aquifer, currently the Palestinians' only source of water. And far from saving the Dead Sea, they say adding brine produced in the desalination plant will destroy its ecosystem. And the NGOs say the World Bank's studies of the project lacked credibility and transparency. Sharon, let's just come back to you. Let me get your response to this. The Palestinian NGO statement, which says that this project undermines Palestinian water rights. It legitimizes Palestinian dispossession from the Jordan River. What do you say to that?
Well, first and foremost, I don't really think that it is relevant to the Jordan River right now, because the Jordan River is not being used at all by anyone, and even if it's very polluted right now, and even if anyone had access to it, no one would be able to use it. This project focuses on water coming from the Red Sea and being traded with water from Lake Kinneret. So I just don't see the relevance. I think the Palestinian protests were to a much larger project that had been discussed for many years, a $10 billion project that was going to have many, many more regional implications. Not that this one doesn't, but I think their protests were honestly to something different, and not to the deal which was signed yesterday, which was a much smaller version of a larger deal.
Munqeth, when we look at those protests by Palestinian NGOs, what do you think of their criticism of the deal, that it legitimizes Israel's water theft of the River Jordan?
Okay.
Because, I mean, Israel has unilateral control of that on the upper reaches of the river, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah. Let's get one thing straight before we go any further, in my opinion. The project that we are looking at today, which called a historical moment, is nothing more than a desalination project at the north of the city of Aqaba, 18 kilometers to be precise. That makes it a very ordinary desalination plant with the plans to take the brine to the Red Sea, 45 kilometers south to the Saudi border. Now, in your opening, you said that a proposed pipe to take the brine all the way to the Dead Sea. And yes, it is a proposed, because that pipe must pass the environmental impact assessment studies and also the economic studies.
Yeah, that pipe wasn't part of Monday's agreement, but it's certainly a project that's been thought about for a long time, isn't it?
It is, and let's remember that the World Bank study, or the study that led by the World Bank conducted about a year ago, the results came out negative. It has a negative impacts environmentally, and it's not economically
So to be specific,
feasible.
Dumping lots of brine, which is a byproduct of desalination, into the Dead Sea, in your opinion, could be ecologically damaging to the Dead Sea.
Exactly. Now, having said that, we go back to the Jordan River. And yes, Israel been enjoying taking the lion's share of the Jordan River water for a long, long time. It was the time at war where everybody used to grab as much as they want, because I don't want to let this water go to my enemy, so I take whatever I can. In 1995, we struck a agreement with Jordan and Israel, allowing Jordanians about 250 million cubic meters from the waters of the Yarmouk and the Jordan River. Now, if we go back a bit in history and look at Johnston plan in the mid-50s, Jordan and the West Bank at that time had a share of 830 million. But now Jordan is getting only 250, leaving the share of the Palestinians with the Israelis.
And
now,
as I understand it, the over-excessive use of the River Jordan is exactly why the Dead Sea is diminishing.
Of course, yani the Jordan River used to bring 1.3 billion cubic meters to the Dead Sea. Today, it's not bringing more than 70 to 100 million cubic meters depending on the rainy season. That means that between 96 and 98% of the river's water been diverted, and that is definitely not sustainable for the region. Now, the way we look at it, when they conducted the World Bank studies, we forced the World Bank at that time to go ahead and do alternative study for the Red Dead, the mega project, the Red Dead Canal. And the studies conducted by 3 experts from the 3 countries, and they came up with a way that they can rehabilitate the Jordan River. We need to look at rehabilitating the water economy in all 3 countries, and to look more into reuse of the water that we have already.
Okay, let me bring Sharon in from Israel, because Sharon, one of the main criticisms of this is that Israel is controlling access to the River Jordan, is using a lot of that water for irrigation, for agricultural needs, and ironically, that is why there is a need for a desalination plant in the first place.
Honestly, in terms of agriculture, Israel is making a huge use of treated wastewater and not the River Jordan in order to water agriculture. I mean, I think that there are 3 countries who have been responsible for really taking water from the River Jordan, and that would be Israel, that would be Jordan, and that would also be Syria, because the river has sources in Syria.
Mark, let me come to you. There seems to be 2 problems with this deal. First of all, whether the desalination plant is the right way to go, given that it means that we end up selling desalinated water back to the Palestinians instead of perhaps giving them access to the River Jordan. And secondly, this whole idea of putting brine into the Dead Sea, which may or may not happen at some point in the future, actually could be an environmental disaster.
Right, so you've said it well. I mean, there are serious environmental and social concerns. The environmental issues are not just how the composition of the Dead Sea water changes, but also if that seawater, when it's transmitted down to the Dead Sea, if it begins to contaminate the underground aquifer water. And if you're interested in the environmental issues, you would also be concerned about the intake structure of the desalination plant at the Red Sea. And as Munqeth Mehyar discussed, then the more serious concerns are the bigger environmental impact that could be made. Positive impact would be restoration of the Jordan River, which is a natural breathing system with much greater biodiversity. The social impacts, as you mentioned, this is a process between 3 countries, 2 of which are at peace with each other, and 2 of which one is occupied by the other. That's the West Bank. If you look at the process that got us to an earlier version of this project over the last 7 years, you can get an idea of just how equitable this new deal will be, and whether it will be fair or not. During the process, Israel continued to deny Palestinian requests for access to the Dead Sea. Even though the Dead Sea is partly on the West Bank, Palestinians don't have access to it. That access is continuing to be denied, even over the 6 or 7 years of consultations.
Do you think that's one reason why they entered into this agreement? Because they think that maybe one day, if there is an eventual peace accord, this needs to be an asset that they have to have a foothold in and an interest in now.
I suppose so. I mean, each actor is in it for their own state, for their own interests. And the Palestinians stand to gain possible access to the Dead Sea and the development of industry there and tourism, like Jordan and Israel have done. The other interest for Palestinians is water. So if there is a fair share of water that comes out of it, could be a good idea for some Palestinians. But when you look at the opposition in each country, it's unanimous, mostly on environmental grounds and also on the social grounds.
It's interesting that this agreement was signed at the World Bank headquarters, so clearly the World Bank is endorsing it as a deal. John Kerry is due in Jerusalem. He says this is a good deal because it improves economic development. Does a project like this have any impact on future peace talks, negotiations?
Well, I think it has positive impact on the businesses in the region, in the Dead Sea. So the potash industry and tourism. Whether you think that's going to lead to peace or not is up for you to decide. If you look at the process that's been up until this point, it's been one mainly of the governments distancing themselves from the people's concerns, and the governments within themselves fighting and battling, denying Israel, denying access to the Dead Sea of Palestinians. And I'd like to point out that what you noted that the root cause of all this is upstream water use, so damming of the Lake of Tiberias in 1964 by Israel, and then later dams by Jordan and Syria on the Yarmouk River. All that water that's been used up until very recently a lot of it has been used to grow crops in the desert, bananas in the desert on the Jordanian side, and dates and what have you on the Israeli side. The question then becomes, if there's so much local mismanagement that the Dead Sea is dying, why do we need the desalination plant to rescue us? And indeed, why should the international community and the World Bank pay for local mismanagement to the tune of billions of dollars? It's a question that needs to be answered before we proceed.
Do you agree with that, Munqeth, that there should be better management of water resources on a local level, better management of wastewater, rather than automatically building desalination plants, which will automatically increase people's consumption and keep having a knock-on effect down the line?
Absolutely, I agree, Annie. The reform of the water sector in all countries is very, very much needed. But I would say that we should leave the desalination option to the last. And since our governments are excited about having a desalination plant, I do not oppose it, really, and especially when we see a historic agreement with the 3 countries on board discussing such a project in the open. I want to see cooperation between the 3 countries on water issues. This is something we do support in the open also. Now, look at the project itself now. The project talks about desalinating in the south and to supply Eilat with a certain amount of water to be exchanged from water in the north for Jordan, where Jordan needs it most. At the same time, I find it good from the Jordanians to include the Palestinians and ask Israel to supply the West Bank with more water. I think this whole formula is an excellent one. We do not oppose it, and we think that's what the region is needed.
Okay, well, this is a key question, isn't it? Let me just ask Sharon this one question, because a lot of this hinges on whether Israel is going to supply the West Bank with more water, because it's certainly not a condition, is it, that they make more water available. It's an option that they could make more water available to sell at a high price to the Palestinians. Is that the case, Sharon?
Well, I was under the assumption that it was a condition of this agreement. I mean, this was just a memorandum of understanding, but I assume once the parties formalize it more than a memorandum of understanding, that it will be something that they commit to. I mean, already Israel is required by the Oslo Accords to supply directly 31 million cubic meters a year of water to the Palestinian Authority, and they're currently supplying directly 52. This is in addition to the 196 million cubic meters a year that the Palestinians receive from the region, from the aquifer. And I don't see any reason why Israel would go back on a commitment. There's no reason I think that they will follow through with this.
Let me say a big thank you to today's guests, Munqeth Mehyar and Mark Zaytoun, and with us on the phone, Sharon Udassin. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your comments, so feel free to tweet us. Our Twitter name is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Shiulie Ghosh. Bye for now.